Have you ever encountered someone, perhaps a man in his 30s, 40s, or even older, who seems perpetually caught in a state of extended adolescence? He might be charming, full of dreams, and possess a youthful energy that's initially captivating. Yet beneath this charismatic facade, there often lies a profound reluctance to embrace adult responsibilities, a pattern of instability in work and relationships, and a subtle, or sometimes overt, avoidance of deep, lasting commitment. This phenomenon, often colloquially termed the man-child, is more than just a societal label. It's a complex psychological pattern with deep roots. Today we delve into why some men never seem to grow up, guided by the profound and illuminating insights of Carl Jung. Jung, a pioneer of depth psychology, explored an archetype he termed the Puer Aeternus, Latin for the eternal boy. This figure, according to Jung, represents a particular psychological makeup, one that clings to the freedom and irresponsibility of youth, often driven by an unconscious fear of being pinned down by the demands of adult life. Jung wrote in The Development of Personality, "Neurotic is always an artist monkey, but he is an artist who has been unable to find the way to his own art." In the context of the Puer Aeternus, this art could be seen as the art of living a fulfilled, mature life. This video is an invitation to explore this archetype, not as a judgment but as a means of understanding. We will examine the typical behaviors, the underlying fears, the impact on relationships, and most importantly, the potential for transformation that Jung's work offers. What is it that keeps the Puer Aeternus tethered to an idealized past or a fantasy of a future that never quite arrives? How does his shadow, as Jung described the unconscious and often less desirable aspects of our personality, manifest in this refusal to engage fully with reality? And crucially, what does true freedom look like beyond the illusion of an endless, responsibility-free existence? Prepare to look into a mirror, perhaps recognizing aspects of yourself or others as we unpack the complexities of the eternal boy and the journey towards authentic adulthood, a journey that, as Jung believed, is central to a meaningful life. Let's begin by dissecting the core characteristics of what is often termed the man-child syndrome. This isn't merely about a delayed enjoyment of youthful pleasures. It's a pervasive pattern marked by a fundamental refusal of adult responsibilities. This refusal isn't always a defiant no shouted from the rooftops. More often, it's a subtle, insidious evasion, a series of postponed decisions, unfinished projects, and commitments that are either never made or quickly abandoned. Think of the individual who drifts from one low-stakes job to another, never quite settling, always dreaming of a grand yet undefined future. Or the person who, despite their age, still relies heavily on parental support, not just financially but emotionally, struggling to make independent choices or weather life's inevitable storms. This avoidance extends deeply into the realm of relationships. Here the impact can be particularly damaging. Partners often find themselves carrying the emotional and practical load, dealing with someone who might be charming and exciting on the surface, but proves unreliable and emotionally unavailable when true intimacy and shared responsibility are required. There's a profound disconnect between the often charismatic, even dazzling facade and the underlying immaturity and, crucially, fear. This isn't to say the charm isn't real, it often is. The Puer Aeternus, as Jung might identify this pattern, can be genuinely engaging, full of ideas, and possess a captivating, almost childlike wonder. However, this charm can also serve as a defense mechanism, a way to deflect scrutiny from the deeper insecurities and the reluctance to face the mundane, sometimes difficult realities of adult life. The core driver of this stagnation, this refusal to step fully into adulthood, is very often fear. Fear is a powerful, paralyzing force. It can be the fear of failure. If I don't truly commit to a career, I can't truly fail at it. It can be the fear of being trapped. A mortgage, a long-term relationship, a demanding job, all can feel like cages to the individual who equates freedom with a lack of binding ties. There's also the fear of mediocrity, the fear of discovering that one's grand dreams might not materialize, or that life might be, at times, ordinary. As Jung suggested, the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. For the individual caught in this pattern, accepting the limitations and responsibilities of adulthood feels like a kind of death, the death of infinite potential, the death of the idealized self who can be anything because he has not yet chosen to be something specific. This fear often manifests as a constant restlessness, a need for novelty, and an inability to tolerate boredom or the quiet, steady work that true achievement often requires. Consider the person who is always planning their next great adventure, their next escape, but struggles to find meaning or satisfaction in the here and now. Their energy is directed outwards, towards the next horizon, rather than inwards towards building a stable foundation. The impact on life is one of unfulfilled potential and a lingering sense of dissatisfaction, often masked by bravado or cynicism. Relationships become a revolving door, or they settle into unhealthy dynamics where one partner overfunctions to compensate for the other's underfunctioning. The disconnect between the projected image, the cool, carefree individual, and the inner reality of anxiety and avoidance creates a deep internal tension. Jung's work continually emphasizes the importance of self-knowledge as the cornerstone of psychological health and growth. Understanding this pattern, whether in oneself or in others, is not about assigning blame. It is about shedding light on the unconscious forces at play. It's about recognizing that the freedom sought is often an illusion, a flight from the very experiences that forge a strong, resilient self. The journey to overcoming this pattern begins with the courageous act of looking inward, of confronting these fears and the immaturity they breed. Without this self-awareness, the cycle is likely to continue, with life feeling like a series of missed opportunities and superficial engagements. What unacknowledged fears might be subtly shaping your own choices, or the choices of someone you know, away from deeper commitment and responsibility? This question isn't meant to be comfortable, but as Jung knew, true growth often begins in discomfort. To truly understand the man-child phenomenon from a depth psychology perspective, we must turn to several key concepts developed by Carl Jung. The most central of these is the Puer Aeternus or eternal boy archetype. Jung identified this archetype as representing a specific psychological orientation characterized by a fixation on adolescent modes of being. The Puer Aeternus is often charming, creative, and full of potential, but he struggles profoundly with commitment, discipline, and the mundane realities of adult life. He lives in a provisional way, always on the verge of starting his real life, but never quite taking the decisive steps to ground his dreams in tangible reality. Jung saw this figure as often being tied to what he termed a mother complex, not necessarily meaning an overly doting literal mother, but rather a psychological entanglement with the maternal, which can manifest as a desire to remain in a state of protected, unchallenging dependency. As Jung wrote in Ion, researches into the phenomenology of the self, the Puer Aeternus often expects to be able to pluck the fruit of life without paying the price. This expectation sets him up for a cycle of enthusiasm, followed by disappointment and retreat. The Puer Aeternus is an archetype. For Jung, archetypes are universal, primordial images and patterns of behavior that reside in the collective unconscious, a layer of the psyche shared by all humanity. They are like blueprints for human experience, influencing our perceptions, emotions, and actions. Think of archetypes like the hero, the wise old man, the great mother, and in this case, the eternal boy. Recognizing the Puer Aeternus as an archetype helps us understand that this isn't just an individual quirk, but a pattern that has played out across cultures and throughout history. It gives the experience a certain universality, but also, as Jung emphasized, archetypes have both a light and a dark side. The Puer's light side is his youthful energy, his idealism, his capacity for wonder. But if he remains stuck, the darker aspects emerge. This brings us to the concept of the shadow. Jung described the shadow as the unconscious part of the personality, containing all those aspects of ourselves that we repress or deny, our weaknesses, our socially unacceptable impulses, our undeveloped potentials, and our fears. For the Puer Aeternus, the shadow often includes a profound inability to cope with the frustrations and limitations of reality. His fear of being ordinary, of failing, or of being tied down gets relegated to the shadow. Because it's unconscious, this fear then drives his behavior in ways he doesn't fully understand, leading to procrastination, avoidance, and sometimes a surprising lack of empathy for how his choices affect others. Jung stated in Psychology and Religion, West and East, Everyone carries a shadow, and the less it is embodied in the individual's conscious life, the blacker and denser it is. When the Puer doesn't confront his fear of commitment, for instance, this shadow aspect might manifest as a pattern of broken promises or an inability to sustain long-term efforts, creating a stark contrast to his often articulated high ideals. He might project this shadow onto the world, seeing others who are committed as boring or trapped, rather than acknowledging his own anxieties. The psychological state the Puer Aeternus clings to can be understood through powerful metaphors. One such metaphor is the art paradise of childhood. This represents an idealized state of innocence, freedom from responsibility, and endless possibility, a time when needs were met without significant effort. The Puer unconsciously seeks to perpetuate this paradise, resisting the fall into the complexities and burdens of adulthood. Another potent metaphor Jung and his followers used is the psychic womb of the mother. This image suggests a state of being completely enveloped, protected and sustained, without the need for independent struggle or self-reliance. Remaining in this psychic womb, whether it's perpetuated by an actual overprotective parent, a partner who enables dependency, or an internal refusal to be born into self-responsibility, prevents the individual from developing his own strength and resilience. He is shielded from the very challenges that would forge his adult identity. Consider the man who, well into his adult years, still expects his romantic partner or his parents to manage his finances, make difficult decisions for him, or rescue him from the consequences of his inaction. He is, in a sense, still seeking that unconditional, all-encompassing care, a longing to return to a state where life did not demand so much of him. Jung believed that confronting these unconscious dependencies and the allure of these psychic states was essential for the journey of individuation, the process of becoming a whole integrated self. What paradise or womb might be offering a false sense of security, preventing a fuller engagement with life's challenges and rewards? Now let's delve deeper into the main ideas that help us identify and understand the Puer Aeternus. Recognizing this pattern often begins with noticing a persistent theme of unfulfilled dreams and a litany of excuses. The individual might speak eloquently and passionately about grand plans, the novel they're about to write, the business they're going to start, the transformative journey they're planning to take. Yet these dreams remain perpetually on the horizon, and when questioned about progress, there's often a sophisticated array of reasons, external circumstances, lack of the right opportunity, or a need for more preparation that explain the inaction. As Marie-Louise von Franz, a close associate of Jung, noted in her seminal work, The Problem of the Puer Aeternus, these individuals often possess a psychology of not yet typical behaviors. Further illuminate the pattern. Instability is a hallmark, manifesting in frequent job changes, a series of short-lived romantic relationships, or a nomadic lifestyle that prevents putting down roots. There's a profound aversion to commitment, not just in relationships, but in any area that requires sustained effort and a narrowing of options. This isn't necessarily a conscious malice, rather it stems from an unconscious fear that commitment equals a kind of death, the death of infinite possibility. The Puer wants to keep all doors open, but in doing so often walks through none of them meaningfully. This leads us to the duality of charm and shadow. The Puer Aeternus can be incredibly engaging, witty and enthusiastic. This charm is often genuine, drawing people in. However, this bright exterior can obscure a significant shadow: irresponsibility, emotional immaturity, unreliability, and sometimes a surprising lack of consideration for the feelings or needs of others who are impacted by their choices. Jung taught that the shadow, when unacknowledged, gains power. In this case, the unacknowledged fear of adulthood fuels the very behaviors that sabotage the Puer's potential and his relationships. Idealization and escape are common coping mechanisms. The Puer often idealizes the past, the good old days of freedom, or a fantasized future where everything will magically fall into place. The present, with its demands and imperfections, is often devalued or experienced as a waiting room. Escape can take many forms: excessive daydreaming, immersion in hobbies to the exclusion of responsibilities, substance use, or a constant pursuit of new and exciting experiences that offer a temporary reprieve from the pressure to settle down. This constant seeking of the next big thing prevents engagement with the here and now. There's often a distorted self-perception. The pure may see himself as a free spirit, a nonconformist, or someone with extraordinary potential, who is simply misunderstood or waiting for the world to catch up. While there might be elements of truth in this, it can also mask a deep-seated insecurity and an unwillingness to be judged by the standards of ordinary adult achievement. He might overestimate his talents or underestimate the effort required to bring them to fruition. The impact on relationships is invariably significant. Partners, friends, and family members may initially be drawn to the pure's vibrancy, but eventually grow weary of the unreliability, the emotional unavailability, and the burden of carrying responsibilities that are consistently shirked. Relationships often become characterized by frustration, disappointment, and a dynamic where one person is perpetually waiting for the other to grow up. This leads to the profound irony of the pine-to prison of false freedom. The Puer Aeternus desperately seeks freedom, but the kind of freedom he pursues, freedom from responsibility, from commitment, from limitation, ultimately becomes a cage. By avoiding the choices and efforts that define a life, he remains undefined, unfulfilled, and often deeply lonely, despite his social adeptness. Jung himself spoke about the nature of true freedom, suggesting it is not merely doing what one likes, but being able to do what one ought to do, what is necessary for one's own development and for the good of the whole. The Puer's freedom is often a flight, not a grounded capacity to act meaningfully in the world. This archetypal depth of this pattern, as Jung illuminated, shows us that this isn't just a personal failing, but a common human struggle, magnified in certain individuals. It's the struggle between the allure of eternal youth and the call to mature engagement with life. Practical examples of refusing to grow are abundant. The 40-year-old who still relies on his parents to bail him out of financial difficulties, the perpetual student who accumulates degrees but never launches a career, the charming individual who serially breaks hearts because he cannot face the prospect of a committed long-term partnership. Each of these scenarios illustrates a different facet of the refusal to embrace adult tasks and limitations. Finally, we arrive at the wine paradox of unexplored potential. The Puer Aeternus is often genuinely gifted and full of promise, yet this very potential can become a burden. The fear of not living up to it, or of choosing one path and thereby negating all others, can lead to a paralysis where no potential is realized. It's as if keeping the potential in a purely hypothetical state protects it from the messy, imperfect reality of actualization. Jung stated in The Undiscovered Self, the decisive question for man is he related to something infinite or not? That is the telling question of his life. For the Puer, the infinite is often the vastness of his own uncommitted potential, a tantalizing but ultimately barren landscape, if never cultivated. Have you ever felt the weight of your own potential? And how has the fear of not realizing it, or of choosing wrongly, influenced your actions or inactions? As we journey through this exploration of the Puer Aeternus, it's crucial to engage in self-reflection. Consider this video as a kind of mirror, not for judgment but for recognition. Perhaps you see aspects of this pattern within yourself, fleeting moments of avoidance, a hesitancy to fully commit, or a longing for a simpler, less demanding existence. Or perhaps you recognize these traits more clearly in someone you know, a friend, a family member, or a partner. Jung's psychology is at its heart a psychology of awareness. He believed that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. The first step towards any meaningful change is seeing things as they are, without the sugarcoating of rationalization or the harshness of condemnation. If you recognize these tendencies, in whatever degree, what does this mirror show you specifically about your own unlived life or unacknowledged fears? This recognition opens the door to the possibility of change by confronting truth. Growth is rarely comfortable, and confronting the truth of one's immaturity or fear-driven avoidance can be painful. However, Jung consistently emphasized that psychic health comes not from avoiding pain, but from integrating it, from understanding its meaning. The Puer Aeternus avoids the suffering of limitation and commitment, but in doing so often encounters a different kind of suffering, the pain of meaninglessness, of unfulfilled potential, and of superficial connections. The truth in this context is that authentic adulthood, with its responsibilities and challenges, also brings with it the possibility of deep satisfaction, genuine intimacy, and the profound meaning that comes from contributing to something larger than oneself. Is there a difficult truth about your own patterns of engagement with life that you've been avoiding? And what might happen if you faced it with courage? It's also vital to question the nature of the freedom sought by the Puer Aeternus. Is it true freedom? Or is it, as we've discussed, a flight from the very conditions that create a robust and resilient self? Jung's concept of individuation, the lifelong process of becoming a distinct, integrated individual, involves embracing limitations, making choices, and shouldering the consequences. True freedom, from a Jungian perspective, is not the absence of all constraints, but the capacity to choose consciously within those constraints, to shape one's destiny through deliberate action and commitment, rather than being passively shaped by unconscious fears and desires. The Puer's freedom often leads to a form of psychic paralysis, an inability to move forward because no single path seems perfect enough. What does genuine freedom mean to you? And how does it differ from simply avoiding what feels difficult or binding? We must also reflect on the mechanism of guilt projection. When the Puer Aeternus fails to meet expectations or causes disappointment, a common defense is to project guilt onto others or onto external circumstances. It's the world's fault, the system's fault, or her fault for expecting too much. This projection prevents self-reflection and accountability. Jung taught that what we fail to see in ourselves, we often project onto others. By blaming the external, the Puer avoids the difficult inner work of acknowledging his own part in his struggles. Recognizing this tendency towards projection is crucial. When things go wrong, what is your first instinct? Is it to look outwards for blame or inwards for understanding and responsibility? Ultimately, the journey of overcoming this pattern requires an honest confrontation with immaturity and fears. This is the bedrock of transformation. It means acknowledging that the charm, the dreams, and the potential, however real, are not enough if they are not grounded in mature action and a willingness to face life's inevitable difficulties. It means accepting that growth involves letting go of the idealized paradise of childhood and stepping into the more complex but ultimately more rewarding landscape of adulthood. Jung believed that the foundation of all mental illness is the avoidance of legitimate suffering. The legitimate suffering for the Puer is the pain of giving up the fantasy of limitless options, of committing to a path, of accepting imperfection in himself and in life. It is the fear of being pinned down, the fear of failure, the fear of mediocrity. Confronting these fears, not by trying to eliminate them, but by acting in spite of them, is the way through. This confrontation isn't a one-time event, but an ongoing process of choosing responsibility over escape, commitment over provisional living, and reality over fantasy. What is one small concrete step you could take today to confront a fear that has been holding you back from a fuller, more committed engagement with your life? Our journey through the landscape of the Puer Aeternus, the eternal boy, illuminated by the profound psychology of Carl Jung, has shown us a figure both captivating and cautionary. We've seen how the refusal of adult responsibilities, driven by deep-seated fears and a longing for an idealized, commitment-free existence, can lead to a life of unfulfilled dreams and relational strain. Jung's concepts of the archetype, the shadow, and the powerful allure of the psychic womb of the mother, or the paradise of childhood, provide us with a framework for understanding why some individuals remain caught in this pattern of extended adolescence. The charismatic facade often masks an underlying immaturity, a distorted self-perception, and a flight from the very experiences that forge a mature identity. But understanding, as Jung consistently emphasized, is the first step towards transformation. The path out of the Puer Aeternus complex is not about extinguishing the spirit of youth with its creativity and idealism. Rather, it is about integrating these qualities into a life grounded in reality, responsibility, and meaningful commitment. It involves the courageous confrontation with one's own shadow, the unacknowledged fears, the tendency to project blame, and the seductive pull of false freedom. This is the essence of what Jung called the process of individuation, becoming whole by embracing all aspects of oneself, the light and the dark, the potential and the limitation. The journey is not easy. It demands an honest look in the mirror, a willingness to question the nature of the freedom one seeks, and a commitment to face the immaturity that has perhaps been rationalized or ignored. It requires accepting that true growth often involves navigating discomfort and embracing the legitimate suffering that comes with making choices and shouldering their consequences. Yet the reward for such inner work is immense, a life lived with greater authenticity, depth, and purpose. It is the difference between dreaming of life and truly living it. As Carl Jung wrote in Modern Man in Search of a Soul, the meaning and purpose of a problem seem to lie not in its solution, but in our working at it incessantly. The challenge of the Puer Aeternus, whether recognized in oneself or in another, is such a problem, one whose engagement offers the profound opportunity for growth into the fullness of one's being. May this exploration serve as an invitation to that deeper engagement, to awaken to the possibilities that lie beyond the enchanting, yet ultimately limiting horizon of eternal youth.